With how stale and formulaic a lot of TV and films have become over the years, with studios and streaming services investing more and more in sequels and reboots over new and original ideas, it is always refreshing to come across a piece of media that tries something different. When I heard about Netflix's Kaleidoscope, a miniseries based around the idea of being able to watch the episodes in any given order, so long as you finish with the white episode last, I admit I was not only intrigued but excited. I am always on the side of a show when they are actively taking a creative risk, not simply retelling the same old story in the same old way. Kaleidoscope plays with the way that we consume our media, having Netflix randomly assign a different episode order to each account.
You're going to see a different order than I'm going to see, than my mother's going to see, than my wife is going to see.
By doing this, it allows the audience to have a unique viewing experience, as each person will enter the show at a different time and learn things in a different order, potentially coloring the perception a viewer might have about the events and characters. I love the idea of exploring this, and am a fan of playing with the medium of storytelling itself. When I first heard about the concept of Kaleidoscope, the first thing my mind went to was the 2018 interactive Black Mirror movie, Bandersnatch, which had the viewer as a participant in the story, as they were given the power to make decisions and change which version of the story they got. Kind of like those old choose-your-own-adventure books that had you jumping back and forth through the text given what choice the reader made. The idea of Bandersnatch's interactive way of storytelling similarly excited me at the time, and I watched the movie getting various different endings. Admittedly though, the story of Bandersnatch failed for me to live beyond its unique viewing experience. The options varied from the inconsequential
You chose poorly
to the disjointed, as the deeper you got into the story, the more disconnected the characters and events felt. I admire Bandersnatch for its experimentation, but felt like it failed to tell an actually compelling story, where I could understand the characters and their motivations. Going into Kaleidoscope, I was hoping that the story and characters could live beyond the gimmick and be compelling in their own right.
The idea for the series started from a structural place. With batch delivery, you're getting everything at once. There's no reason, conceptually, why you should have to watch them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
The episode order I was given by Netflix was as follows: yellow, green, blue, orange, violet, red, pink, white. I have seen some online discourse about what the optimal viewing order is, with some orders helping the viewing experience and others greatly hindering it. For example, getting pink as your first episode, which is the ultimate conclusion of all the characters' stories, is akin to reading the last page of a book before reading the rest of the story.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
While in some instances this can be enjoyable and there is an entire subset of people who actively do this, for many it can undercut the impact of the events throughout the rest of the story because they already know how it ultimately turns out. Also, the initial contention of Kaleidoscope is that the show can be viewed in any episode order. However, this in itself does not mean that each different viewing order is equally as entertaining and well crafted. Theoretically, you could watch any show in a random order, but that does not mean it is the best way to experience that story, as by doing this you will likely be missing necessary context and information to understand the events going on. What does Kaleidoscope actively do to make it so that it is not merely a show that has been given to its viewers in random, suboptimal viewing orders? I do think that Kaleidoscope was written with its concept in mind, and is not simply a show that was randomized as a means of a marketing gimmick. There are small little moments throughout each episode that hint at some of the show's through lines. If the viewer is lacking the context to understand some of these moments, they file the new info to the back of their mind and will bring it out to connect the dots a little further down the road. This element of audience investigation is some of the most fun the show is able to offer, as it has the audience asking a bunch of questions and trying to figure out the pieces of the puzzle that are missing. My original viewing of the Red episode was the most fun I had with the show, because it is the initial aftermath of the show's climax, and I was left trying to figure out what happened as everything seemingly devolved into chaos. However, even with its concept embedded in the core of its creation, the show does not really live up to its initial conceit. The show is marketed as being able to be viewed in any order, with the implication being that each version would be entertaining and intriguing in their own right. I have mentioned how not all viewing orders are equal, but I must add that the show was not truly designed to be watched in any order. It was merely designed to be told non-linearly. It is true that Netflix randomizes the episode order for each account. However, one order seems to be the default order, with it being presented as the viewing order by the vast majority of accounts. It just so happens that this order is the order that Netflix presented me with, and the order that seems to be the consensus best way to view the show. This is a little disappointing as it feels like the show does not live up to its promise of being able to be watched in any order. It feels like it was written and created with this default order in mind, and any other orders would be akin to watching a normal show out of order. This default order employs a nonlinear method of storytelling which can be interesting in its own right, but it does not live up to the show's original premise. After my initial watch of Kaleidoscope, I figured that I would watch it again, through the lens of a different viewing order. I ultimately decided to watch it in chronological order, because I was curious as to how the story would hold up if it were told in a more traditional way. Unfortunately, I found the show to be a bit of a slog when I watched it chronologically, as doing so robs it of the fun audience investigation that was prevalent throughout my original viewing. When its unique method of storytelling is removed, the story itself is nothing special and leaves a lot to be desired. It really just doesn't feel like there's much there when it comes to the story and the characters. It's possible that the writers of the show opted for a more simple story because of the more complex way they chose to convey that story, which is something I can definitely understand. Having the bulk of the story exist in the familiarity of the heist genre's common tropes allows the audience to find their footing. Still, I think I should note that without this idea that you could watch the show in any order, it would have been quickly dismissed by most as not being worth the time.
He doesn't care about the money. It's never been about the money, has it?
The story of Kaleidoscope centers around a heist, where Leo and his crew are trying to steal $7 billion worth of bonds before sailing off into the sunset. I'd wager that there are two main groups of people who decided to give Kaleidoscope a watch. People excited by the show's gimmick, and people who saw that Giancarlo Esposito was the star. Esposito is phenomenal as always, with him and his co-star Rufus Sewell giving standout performances. And it really is Esposito's show, as it is essentially the story of his character Ray Vernon. And this works both to the show's benefit and detriment. With Ray, or Leo as he goes by for most of the show, being the central focus for most of the episodes, I feel like it robs some of the potential the show's method of storytelling could have had in a true ensemble show. With Leo as the show's protagonist, each episode merely highlights a different part of his journey, never really fleshing out the other characters with too much detail or testing the audience's perception very much. I think to get the most out of this concept, each episode should have shown a varying viewpoint of a character, allowing the audience to fully empathize and understand them. For instance, if there was an episode told from Leo's counterpart, Roger Salas's perspective, we could better understand his character and his motivations. Also, given the randomized episode order, it would be interesting to see if viewers who experienced Roger's point of view first would be more sympathetic to him. With Leo's POV, we see Roger as a corrupt man, the clear villain of the story who gets what is coming to him in the end. But if we get to experience an episode from Roger's side of things, maybe the audience's perception would align with his version of events where he is the person who was wronged, and that his life had been ruined because of a mistake he made in his past. I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, or that this is even the kind of story they would have any interest in telling. Simply, I think that it would have been a more optimized use of the method of storytelling employed by the show, as I think it could give each viewer a more unique perspective on the events that transpire. Each episode does have its own little self-contained focus. Going chronologically, Violet shows us Leo's backstory and why he holds a grudge against Roger. Green is a prison break. Yellow is about assembling the team. Orange focuses on Ava becoming the mole for the FBI. Blue sets up the plan for the heist. White is the heist itself. Red is the immediate aftermath of the heist. And pink is Bob's revenge and the story's ultimate conclusion. Every episode is framed in its relation to the heist, each one influencing the climax or feeling its ripples. However, I find two episodes to feel a little unnecessary, those being the two episodes with the largest distance from the heist in Violet and Green. These episodes have very little to do with the heist itself, and are more a means of giving Leo a sympathetic backstory.
Backstory?
A lot of the main characters are missing from them or appear only briefly, making them feel more disconnected from the core of the story. I feel like the information conveyed in these episodes could have been sprinkled throughout the rest of the season, adding to the audience investigation. I also don't think it helps that the answers we get in an episode like Violet in regards to the origin of Leo's obsession with Roger feels kind of underwhelming. When you are watching the show, and Leo is talking about what an evil man Roger is and how he took everything from him,
you know what he did to me. He took everything from me.
Paired with some of Roger's present-day dealings, your imagination runs wild with elaborate ways of how Roger screwed Leo over. Now maybe it's just me, but I feel like the answer to what Roger actually did to screw Leo over was a little underwhelming, and he is honestly more of a villain in the present day than anything he ever did to Leo. Throughout the whole of Violet, I expected for Roger to intentionally screw over Leo and actively betray him. What we got was more of a series of unfortunate events, poor decisions, and some conveniences in the writing department. The pair decide to pull a jewel heist on the club that mistreated Leo's wife, Lily. Leo is the one that suggests the heist because he is rightfully angry about how Lily was treated. He also decides not to tell Lily about the heist, which would have been fine if Lily didn't decide to go back to work for the club that fired her and mistreated her and her family. When I first watched this, I was baffled as to why she would go back to work for these people. Oh, you need help with this paperwork? Well, you should have thought of that before you fired me. When things start to go south, Roger actually puts his life on the line for Leo twice, incapacitating the guard who found Leo when Roger could have just dipped, and then following Leo back into a burning building to try and help him find Lily. When Roger does ultimately abandon them and run away to save his own hide, it's pretty ambiguous if he would have been even able to save Lily.
Could you have saved Lily?
I don't know.
Roger did start the fire that resulted in Lily's death, and Leo was arrested as a result of the heist. But Roger did not want or intend for either of these things to happen. I just feel like what we saw in Violet in regards to Roger's actions against Leo were not villainous in the way we were led to believe they were. It feels like the show is telling us for most of the season that Roger is an evil, corrupt bastard, but the villain origin story they gave us does not live up to that. I think getting rid of the Violet episode and leaving it up to the audience's own imagination of what Roger did to Leo would have been a much more interesting way to go. I think the show does this a lot where the random episode order has the audience asking some pretty interesting questions, only to be disappointed by some underwhelming answers. At the end of the Red episode, where the FBI looks in Roger's safe and he immediately asks to speak to his lawyer, I was super curious. What could possibly be in there that would make him seem instantly guilty and destined for prison? I thought it might have been RJ's dead body or something. The actual answer, though, was one of the necklaces Leo stole on their last heist together 24 years ago. The show acts like this is a massive slam dunk. Boom, busted. No way he can talk his way out of this one.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Initially, I was confused how anyone would even know the significance of the necklace, but I guess the show does a convincingly enough job showing the FBI agent's obsession with the case to potentially know about some of the missing jewelry. Even with that concession, I think there are ways he could have talked himself out of it, as there is no record of him even being at the event of the heist. Just a bit of a disappointing reveal. Roger's sentencing in general doesn't make any real sense. He is convicted of grand larceny, identity theft, and murder. The only one of these I think they could prove with the evidence that they have is identity theft. But what makes less sense is the fact that for all of these things, he only gets 20 years, and is supposedly likely to get out after 8.
So they gave me 20 years. My lawyer says he'll be out in 8.
Doesn't really make much sense to me. Unfortunately, the show is filled with things that don't really make all that much sense.
You say one word to anyone about infiltrating our system, and I will ruin the lives of anyone you ever even looked at.
But he's looking at you. So does that mean you have to ruin your own life? Some of the aspects of the heist itself, as a viewer, you just kind of have to go with. Like the bees of it all.
No, not the bees! Not the bees!
I don't really understand how throwing a bunch of bees in the walking simulator would trick it into thinking that Roger's walk was actually being copied. Also, why does Judy send down the bonds in the elevator instead of going down with them? She doesn't really do anything else after sending them down, so why not just go down with them and make sure they get where they need to go? These honestly weren't too big of issues for me, as I'm pretty willing to suspend my disbelief surrounding the specifics of the heist plan, but I do think they are worth noting. Something that I have a harder time forgiving is Bob being allowed to participate in the heist. He is literally the reason for almost everything that goes wrong and is the writer's big dumb tool to force conflict and create suspense. Conflict and suspense in themselves are great things, but when the driving force for most of it is one really dumb character that logically should not even be part of the heist, it starts to feel a bit contrived. Bob just kind of invites himself to be part of the heist. I figured supposed criminal mastermind Leo would see Bob for the liability that he is, but he just kinda lets him stay and muck things up. Bob is the cause of almost all of the group's problems. During the Diamond Way heist, he doesn't listen to anyone or stick to the plan. He is shot in the hand and leaves evidence that traces back to one of the group members. By being shot in the hand, he is now toxic and useless as he is no longer able to crack the safe. He then breaks protocol and goes to one of the members' houses, allowing the FBI to spot him and follow him, compromising himself and 3 other members. The whole time he is doing this, he is beefing with the actual useful members of the team and making it clear that he will backstab them the first chance he gets, which he does. My problem is that the other characters just let Bob be part of the team, even though they can see that he compromises the whole thing. He's essentially a device that allows the writers to do whatever they want, explaining it away, saying it's just Bob being Bob. I will say one thing for Bob though. After he loses his voice, those text-to-speech scenes are really fun.
Texas, talk it, McCoy.
Where is my wife? Where is Stan? Where is my $100 million?
So yeah, overall the story and characters leave some things to be desired.
It all seems wrapped up to me.
Although much of this video I've been pretty harsh on the show, I don't actually think it is that bad, and I actually did enjoy my first watch through of it. Even though it didn't fully live up to its original premise, it did attempt to tell a story in an interesting and unconventional way, taking a pretty big risk in the process. It didn't nail it by any means, but the mere fact that it tried to do something creative I think should be rewarded. I'm probably a little more forgiving of some of its shortcomings because of this, but that's because I wish more shows had the courage to try and tell a new and interesting story, or to tell a story in a new and interesting way. Similar to Bandersnatch, where I was ultimately underwhelmed by the story and will likely never revisit it, I think Kaleidoscope is worthy of praise. If I had to give Kaleidoscope a rating, I would probably give it a mid-6. I enjoyed it, but it is held back by its shortcomings, and I am not likely to give it much thought in the future. If you somehow made it to the end of this video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, it would mean a lot if you liked and subscribed. It really helps out the channel. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.